there everybody, my name is Bloomer Brown and welcome to episode 11 of Ksp Retrograde, where this morning, just as the sun is cresting the horizon at the KSC, we receive a notification from Kerbal alarm clock telling us that it is once again time to pay attention to the Minmus lander, a vessel that has admittedly been wandering in deep space for quite some time now, following something of a mishap on the takeoff and return to Kerbal. So what is happening at the moment is we are of course getting ready for a correction burn that is going to cost us about 50 meters per second of our precious Delta V, and basically bring us in for a close encounter with the moon. And through the vagaries of vector and scalar quantities, this is going to basically kick down our periapsis just a little bit closer to the planet Kerbal, which should make recovering this just a little bit easier. And by tweaking the burn, I managed to get myself down ever so slightly lower than geosynchronous altitude, and still have a little bit of Delta V left in the tank to drop my apoapsis so that I do not encounter the moon on another pass. And so we set a quick Kerbal alarm clock to remind me to pay attention to it once we are coming in for our close approach to the moon, before jumping out to see something a little bit more interesting. And what could be more interesting and exciting than another rocket launch, especially one which is carrying a brand new piece of hardware towards the sky. We are still flying on the 2.5 meter rocket that we used to loft ourselves towards the moon, and much like the follow-up to the Apollo missions, we are going to be sending a space station into orbit. And I'm of course doing this for a couple of reasons, the first of which is that I would like to experiment with some slightly longer duration stays in space before sending our Kerbals too far from home. And of course a space station is the ideal environment to begin testing things like this out. There's a couple of new features added to this particular version of KSP, including thermal management, that I would like to investigate. And it's also been a while since I've messed around with TAC life support, and I want to make sure that I know what I am doing before I send a crew off into deep space with no hope of recovery. And the second motivation behind the launch of this space station is of course the fact that we are due a payday. We have got a contract to place a space station in orbit with a couple of various parameters, which I actually cannot remember at this moment, though I do believe that the mobile laboratory as well as the cupola module were part of the contract. Anyway, back to the launch itself, which has gone pretty textbook, even if I do say so myself. Basically I am aiming for pretty much equatorial orbit, circularized around 100 kilometers, which gives me a little bit of wiggle room above the atmosphere for when I am trying to chase this down with the various modules I will be launching up here. And once we reach our apoapsis, we can just burn off the remaining 200 odd meters per second we need to circularize. And of course, being a little bit pedantic about things this time around, I decide to make use of the reaction control system that I have built into the upper stage of the launch vehicle, and just round things out a little bit better before we detach and start to bring this deorbit this booster to try and avoid Kessler syndrome. Now I cannot quite remember whether or not that stack separator is going to be tracked by the game, though I do have a sneaking suspicion that it will be, and it may be a case that I will return to deorbit that as well at some point to avoid crashing into it with future missions. Anyway, a short time later, our booster is catching some serious air and also no small amount of shock heating as it re-enters the atmosphere, putting on an impressive light show for anyone watching from below. And as the spacecraft starts to break up and disintegrate in the upper atmosphere, my thoughts start to turn to maybe integrating some reusability in this particular space program. But those are goals for another day, I think. Anyway, with thoughts of fancy reusable rockets pushed firmly to the back of my mind for the present, I decided to make use of my existing hardware to loft an additional module up towards our shiny new space station. So yeah, the situation as it stands is that the space station core has only got a single docking port, and this new module should hopefully address that and also add in a little bit of extra crew capacity. And if I remember correctly, there may also be a little bit of equipment for TAC life support included in this. Admittedly, it has been about 6 months since I actually recorded this footage, and I am trying to analyze it and figure out exactly what I was doing at the time. Anyway, it seems that the slightly younger version of myself managed to time the liftoff of this vehicle pretty well. You can see us actually coming in pretty close, down to under 3 kilometers, I believe, which is actually not too bad. It's almost a direct ascent to the space station. But yeah, I do seem to fall down a little bit once I start to get in a little bit closer, and I should have perhaps set down a maneuver node to actually run my circularization burn, but I didn't do that, and I just decided to eyeball it instead and attempt to rendezvous with this vessel. So yeah, managed to get myself into orbit and begin slowly tweaking it and sort of bringing myself in for a close encounter. Now obviously for YouTube it would be better to have these things happen on the day side of the planet. So what you can see me doing there is basically using a combination of the RCS thrusters and the main engine to basically pull the encounter back towards the brighter side of the day-night terminator and slowly begin inching my way in. And I do mean slowly. I've actually sped up this footage to about 8 times normal speed to spare you the tedium of watching your way through this entire rendezvous and docking, which does involve some really rather aggressive burning in order to sort of match velocities and get onto the same orbit as the space station core. The problems with this docking, of course, are compounded by the fact that my RCS thrusters are not really balanced across the center of mass, which introduces some weird oscillations as I wrestle with the SAS and RCS systems, trying to get this thing pointed and lined up for a successful docking, which actually starts to eat into my time a little bit, and unfortunately by the time I get anywhere near close enough for a docking, we pass beyond the day-night terminator, and unfortunately for you, the docking ends up happening in the dark after all. But eventually we do manage to dock with the space station and carry out a couple of station keeping duties, and yeah, basically spend a little bit of time with this until it comes into the full light of day and you can bask in the glory of the space station, which is taking shape very nicely high above Kerbal. And yeah, so with the new module in place, I decide it is time to slip away gracefully and deorbit yet another booster and allow it to drop back into the the atmosphere and burn up harmlessly on re-entry. Unfortunately though, this time around, it seems that the booster really doesn't want to burn up in the atmosphere and actually manages to survive re-entry. Unfortunately though, there are no parachutes on this, and so its fate is ultimately sealed as it goes subsonic and plunges harmlessly into the ocean. And moving swiftly along, in an episode which seems to be very heavily focused on our unmanned space program, I decide that it is time to once again start lighting fires under Kerbals and launch a vessel known as the Borealis Outpost, which is already running into some minor issues. TAC Life Support is of course complaining that oxygen is running low. So yeah, it's a case I think that Bill and Bob Kerman are probably going to be okay, since they are only going to be taking a short suborbital flight. So yeah, basically we are sending these guys up on vacation to the North Pole, a biome that we actually technically have reached but also technically haven't in this particular version of the game. I do believe that the two poles are actually separate biomes in version 1.7, and there is problem number 2 making itself apparent, as our fairing seems to have some separation anxiety at the most inopportune of times. So yeah, we are interested in gathering some of the science from the North Pole. Jebediah, of course, has already visited the South Pole since upgrading to version 1.7 of the game, but nobody has actually been to the North Pole. And with some sort of long duration science experiments unlocked in the tech tree, I thought we might as well send an expedition up here and, give Bill and Bob a little bit of a vacation while we're at it. So yeah, leaving the booster behind us, which is essentially the first stage of the 2.5 meter launcher that we have been using to loft our hardware of late, we finally get into the regime of trying to land this thing, which is of course more complicated due to the atmospheric effects. Too much drag and we will end up falling short, and at the same time I would rather try to land just short of the day-night terminator, though from looking at the map view it does appear that we are going to be in a pretty good situation once we pass through the plasma cloud and basically regain signal with the KSC and tell them that the situation is nominal. And so basically we are now at the mercy of the atmosphere, and I take a moment to grab up some of the scientific experiments that we have yet to obtain from this biome, and we can of course deploy the parachute and begin slowing ourselves down. Unfortunately I expended all of the fuel on re-entry because I was a little bit worried that we were coming in too hot. Anyway, deploying the heat shield, or rather trying to jettison the heat shield, doesn't really go according to plan. I do believe that the explosion there was caused by the stack separator, and while I did test this out before actually launching it up here, something must have been tweaked at some point. Anyway, with a slightly bumpy landing, Bill and Bob Kerman are successfully and safely down on the surface of the pole, and we can begin setting up the outpost proper. And with the standard signs shuffle out of the way, which is of course something that's become standard practice at this stage and you really don't need to see that, we play of course the obligatory round of golf before planting out a flag to forever mark the occasion of our first long duration stay at the North Pole. So Bill and Bob Kerman head north for a little vacation and bring some signs along to keep them entertained. mind. So yeah, the outpost itself is actually quite interesting because, as it turns out, the modular storage mod actually integrates well with the surface experiment package. And yeah, I am really sort of struggling to remember the names of all of these mods off the top of my head, especially after such a long break from this. But yeah, the basics of it is that the Universal Storage mod basically provides these very convenient attachment points for integrating things into your rockets. So yeah, basically what we have in this module here are 4 slots for storing various containers, and I've put a battery in there as well as a quarter of a Kerbal inventory system container, and yeah, as I say, it is actually fully compatible with the Surface Experiments package, which is quite useful for us because in this particular version of the game that I have put together, unfortunately Kerbal attachment system actually ends up breaking the Surface Experiments mod because of course you need to connect power lines, and yeah, they basically worked as fuel lines, and yeah, it's a rich tapestry that I have already explained in another episode. So yeah, what we're going to do is we're going to have Bill Kerman basically set up some modular girder segments on the side of the outpost, and then pop out our long duration experiments that are going to, sample all sorts of interesting things from the North Pole, a place where we have very little information about. And yeah, this is actually quite convenient because it means that we can basically, and yeah, the whole thing is actually really, really neatly packaged. We can basically make use of the power supply from the ship to run the base station and basically start gathering all of the data. So yeah, it looks as though Bill Kerman is pretty much set up. So what we are going to do is switch over to Bob and basically have him calibrate and set the experiments running, which is actually something that he has quite a bit of experience with already, following the mission out to the moon. And yeah, following a little bit of jiggery-pokery and repositioning some of the experiments to allow Bob Kerman to gain access to them, I think we finally get our station up and running, and not before time, because the sunset is actually starting to look a little bit golden, and I do believe that we are at a latitude where the sun will actually dip below the horizon at some point. So yeah, with our wonderful outpost set up on the North Pole and our brand new station orbiting high above the equator, I think that this is a perfect time for me to say once again, thank you very much for tuning in. You have been watching Bloomer Brown on YouTube, and I will see you next time.